Welcome to Chapter 3, Art Appreciation. Today we're talking about themes of art. So before we dive into today's lecture and giving you lots of images to look at to think about these themes, I want to explain just a minute what a theme of art is, or even in general, what is a theme. Some technical definitions from the dictionary are: 1, a subject or topic of discourse or an artistic representation, such as like guilt and punishment is the theme of the story. Another definition is a specific and distinctive quality, characteristic, or concern. So the example of that could be the campaign has lacked a theme. It can go into other topics as well. Music, you can have musical themes. Themes can be woven through books. There's just lots of ways that the word theme is used as we know it. And in art, you can look at the history of creation of man and creations that man have done, as we've been looking at in this course. And you can kind of figure out different threads of similarity throughout them. Now, what I don't want to do, and I'll probably repeat this multiple times today, I don't want to make you think that all art, this huge, vast, incredibly wide range of creativity, as we call art, can be simplified down into just these simple characteristic themes or different categories. It's not a categorical simplification of the art world. It is a framework that I'm going to give you. I believe there's 8 of them today. A framework, like just kind of generalizations that you can then expound on. You can then, they overlap and they, you can see that they have these similarities. It's a way for our minds to sort of help us understand what we're seeing and maybe what the meaning of the artwork is, but it's not meant to oversimplify. It's actually meant to add complexity to your understanding of art. However, our human minds, we want some sort of organization, don't we? We look at all this art of all different types, paintings and sculpture, realistic, abstract, cave paintings, extremely modern, strange things we see today that are just seem so odd to us. There's just the installations we talked about last time. There's just so many types of art that our minds can't quite get around it. And so it does help to have not a simplifying categorization, but some sort of organization for our minds to understand what we're looking at. And so when we think about a theme, what you see on this slide is just those 8 different themes that we're going to talk about that I have pulled from the textbook we use for this course. And you don't have to have the textbook. Everything that you will be tested on, quizzed on, will be from these lectures and these slides. So you do want to keep taking good notes. You do want to get everything down, but these are just this textbook's version of what these themes could be. This is not in any way the only set of themes there are. This is not a standard in the art world. These are the 8 major themes. No, this is just one person's version of how you could categorize, organize, I should say, what we're looking at when we look at art into these 8 themes. So hopefully that makes sense. Hopefully you can see it's not meant to simplify. It's meant to actually broaden your understanding. So these 8 themes that you see in blue on the screen will be elaborated on each one today. We'll go through each one. I'll show you 2 examples of artwork related to each one to give you such a snippet of what those could be. Like the first one, The Sacred Realm. I'm going to show you 2 works of art that would fit into that theme, that meet the criteria of that theme, but there are so many, just thousands and thousands of works of art that would be considered artworks on the theme of the sacred realm. So just know that you're getting the tiniest snippet of example of each one. So you can either write those down as you may have been doing already, those 8, or you can write them as we go through. They will be in blue on each slide, and I'll try to make emphasis that this is one of the themes we're talking about. But before we jump into the first one, the sacred realm, I'm going to give you a few bullets on themes. So I'm going to give you a few bullets, as I said, here on the themes of art. So people's visual creations throughout history have one thing in common. They are about something. That's really important to understand that concept. We've looked at work from prehistoric, clear up to modern, and they all are about something. No matter what the artist, even if their intentions are not to make it about something, which happens sometimes in art. We'll look at some examples of that later this semester where artists were actually trying to make it not about something or even reject the concept of art. It still is about something. You just can't not do that. So that's really the heart of finding a theme, is what is it about? So the next bullet says, when looking at themes, we are making guidelines as to what the artwork is about. We're looking at this generalization as far as what is it about? How can we understand it? We have to have a way for our minds to comprehend what we're seeing, and so this is a tool that we can use to help us do that, thinking in terms of themes. Themes and purposes may differ within a work of art. So you may see one and say, well, it changes as it goes through. Like, it starts this way and then it kind of changes into something else. It's gonna have, you'll see that there's lots of things happening within each piece, whether it's storytelling or more of a visual, just looking at it for the visual purposes. It's going to differ within one work of art. They're not just a super simple, here it is. So be prepared to absorb that and think that way too. And then the next bullet says a work of art may reflect more than one theme. You may notice overlap. You may notice that it meets the criteria for multiple themes. And that definitely happens. So you'll hopefully start to notice that as we work through today's lecture. And then finally, what I've already said, but just to summarize it and maybe actually copy this down, the following 8 themes we're going to go through, are not simplified categories, rather a framework for exploring how complex art can be. So rather than trying to actually simplify things down, yes, it is a tool to help our minds understand the world of art and what it's about. But I want you to think of it more like just a framework or a skeleton of how we can explore and how complicated art actually is. So instead of making it more simplified, it should help you and open your mind to see how complex art is and how it does branch out and overlap and all those things. So I hope that kind of clarifies just a little bit. I know it's a lot to take in, this understanding. It's an abstract idea really of thinking about themes. But it really is helpful to go through this process and try to understand how you can determine what a work of art is about. It just further goes along with understanding and increasing your knowledge about what you're looking at when we study art. All right, so the first theme is called the sacred realm. You'll want to mostly copy down what these say, because in each slide like this, I try to explain it a little bit in a brief explanation. Now, the second word on your screen is iconoclasm. That's more of a definition. That's just a vocab word for this chapter. There's only like 2 for this particular chapter. The themes aren't really considered vocab words. They're, like I said, this textbook's or this writer's particular division or categorization of what a theme in art could be. But they're more concepts to understand. So what I've written here is the sacred realm cannot be seen with human eyes. Oftentimes they are religious images, and they help give concrete form to abstract ideas. Now you may have something in your brain that said, hey, we've learned about this before. Yes, in chapter 1, we were talking about what artists do, and one of the things that artists do is they give tangible form, touchable, seeable form to the unknown. When we talked about a Buddhist statue, a Hindu statue. And then we also talked about Vincent van Gogh and how he gives tangible form to feelings and ideas. So this kind of, yes, both of those, especially the Hindu sculpture, would fit into this category of the sacred realm. So as we look at the next couple images, I think you'll see that they are both doing this. They are both creating a tangible, concrete form, concrete object, whether it's a painting, a sculpture, a building that does give form to abstract ideas, or even in religious ideas. I'll show, actually I don't know that I do show any examples of iconoclasm, so let me just explain what that is. Derived from the Greek word meaning image breaking. It refers to the destruction of images in the name of spiritual purity. So this is a good spot to insert this, really, because many creative artistic images have been created throughout history, and they are religious in some form, or spiritual, I guess we could at least say. There's many things that are done on this to explain the spiritual world. And iconoclasm is when another group has come and destroyed, actually breaks, tears down, burns, destroys an image in the name of spiritual purity. Historically, much of the art that we have is based on religious images or spiritual things. And so when these times of destroying those to establish spiritual purity would happen, it's losing a lot of history. It's losing a lot of evidence of previous cultures and societies and what they deemed important to them. So it's kind of a twofold thing. We can understand people wanting to create spiritual purity and not idolatry, but yet at the same time, it has destroyed a lot of history too. So a couple of examples of this would be like during the 8th century, there was a movement that arose against Christian depictions that were thought to go to the point of idolatry. In the early Christian world, even from the beginning, there was a lot of influence by Greek and Roman art. And the early Christians, not intending to do idolatry, did create images. And it's because it's what we do as humans. And so there were many mosaics and frescoes and just images that were painted, created, depicting images from the Bible, about Jesus, about Christianity. And when this 8th century movement went through, they just destroyed all that stuff because they felt like it was idolatry. And then later in the 16th century, the Protestant movements that were rising up went against the Catholic, accusing the Catholics of idolatry. Many things were destroyed. Protestant mobs would go through and ransack churches. Many of the stained glass windows that were in the churches depicting scenes from the Bible were destroyed. Paintings were destroyed. Statues were broken, melted down, and whitewashing over frescoes. So we can understand why people would feel the need to strip things down in fear of idolatry, but it's kind of an interesting thing to think about. Like, is that wrong to have images that depict Christian scenes or spiritual things? And then even more recently, in 2001, in Afghanistan, the Taliban issued an edict to destroy all statues that were potentially being worshipped for other religions, such as Buddhism, that were throughout their region, just ancient works of art or sculptures. They were specifically for religious things that were not Islamic, and so those were all destroyed. Despite many people trying to save them for historic and art purposes, they did destroy a lot of that. So those are just a few examples of when iconoclasm has happened throughout history. Okay, so back to the sacred realm. That's a little side note on the sacred realm. Because this is something people do. This is what we do. We create images or places or spaces, statues, paintings, for the purpose of some sort of spiritual reflection, worship. It's just something that we do. And so in this example, we as humans do, I should say. This first example, as you can see on the left, is titled The Prayer Hall of the Great Mosque in Cordoba, Spain. This is 1786 CE, so this would be what you would think of as AD, after the death of Jesus. And what is a mosque? The mosque, it was a house of community prayer, like a house of worship, where the whole community of believers of Western Islam could come together and pray and worship. So the architects creating this place were striving to create a place where you could come into the sacred realm. Like, this is making a place of sacred versus just looking at something. You are actually in the space of sacred realm. Definitely an aspect of this theme of the sacred realm. And this is one Islamic example, but you could think of all of the hundreds and hundreds of cathedrals throughout Europe that were Christian places. And why were they so ornate and beautiful and stained glass and, just highly artistic creations? They were trying to create like a sacred space. The second example on the right is Cimabue. This is Madonna enthroned, which is a very common theme in Christian art, in old Christian art. We're talking 1280 to 90 AD. Notice sometimes your book or the slides will say CE, which again means Common Era, really what we would think of as AD. And then this one doesn't give you an AD or a BCE, but it's when it doesn't give you a letter at the end like that, it just assume that it is AD, after Jesus, after the death of Jesus. And this is approximately that time period. So you could think of this is Italian painted, but it's prior to the Italian Renaissance. So you have a style, and that's a word from the previous chapter when we talked about style. What do artists do? They have a style. You can see it's kind of not super highly realistic. There's a little bit of flatness or kind of almost cartoonish looking. Like, doesn't just look super duper real. Now, that was the style of this time, partially because artists hadn't really progressed to the point of understanding the human form to make it look very realistic. Partially because this is just the style. This is how they painted things back then. So, just a little side note on how this looks. Now, this might have been like an altarpiece, like something at the front of a church or cathedral. It's not a huge one, I don't believe. I don't have the size on this one, but it looks like it's a little bit smaller painting. Something that's kind of interesting about this one is it's trying to create the sacred realm. Again, things that we can't see. We can't see Mary and Jesus, right? We can only see images of Mary and Jesus. By the way, Madonna means Mary. That would be another way of saying Mary with the Christ child. And you see on either side of her angels. You can tell they have wings, and they have little halos around their head, as does Mary and Jesus. Actually, every figure in the artwork has halos around their head. That is to represent holiness. A couple of things, though, as I was saying, that are kind of interesting about this is, do you notice that Mary is much bigger than any of the other figures in the picture? Obviously, she's bigger than Jesus because she's an adult and he's a baby. But as you can see, the figures at the bottom of the painting are much smaller in scale to the size of Mary. So this is using a technique called hierarchy of size. And so the more important, the more special the person, the bigger they are. You actually would see this in a lot of Egyptian art, just to reference a completely different culture. The pharaohs would be enormous in comparison to like the servants. They would be very, very small. So that's just kind of a technique or a style that was carried through many cultures at that time, or throughout history, I should say. And then down at the bottom, you can see some people down there, and in this particular one, I'm not sure, but oftentimes you have the patron saints represented. So the people who actually paid to have this painting done. And artists, again, worked for money. That's how they would earn their money, and the church would pay, or individuals would pay, to have sacred paintings done. So probably the two in the middle would be the patron saints, or potentially the two people on the outside that are looking up would be the patron saints. One or the other. And then the other two would probably be a couple of disciples that they often put into the painting, or saints, other saints that they would put into the painting. So anyway, this gives you a representation of sacred through a work of art. Again, that was the sacred realm, whether you're looking at something or you're actually in a space. Moving on to the next theme, we have politics and the social order. Give you a second to write down what that says. Political art and social statements are often intertwined and reflect the nature of a society. Can you think of any examples of modern day political art? There are many. Even from past, I think of like the 1940s and World War II images, and what some of the political art, even propaganda art, put out to portray other cultures like Germany and some other countries, because of the political stance of America and having a war with another country. Kind of have people, it's really propaganda, trying to get the public to think one way, but they're using art to do that. Images that are very easily absorbed by the general public to make Germany look bad, which obviously it was bad in what it was doing in World War II. But maybe take a second to have that discussion in your class if your instructor would like to. Some examples of modern day political art, and we could even think of the politics today, in the current presidential campaign. What art shows really does affect society. It really does show influence, I should say. what a society might think about a political situation. Another question might be, where do we most commonly find political art in our community? Newspapers, social media, big time today. That's a modern thing. You can also think of like campaigns and images we see on TV that are meant to influence us one way or the other. Video is definitely an art form that can show political. So those are kind of modern ideas to think about it, but here are some more historical ones. This is the equestrian statue of Marcus Aurelius. There is no artist labeled for this particular one, and the reason being, this is a Roman statue that would have been created in, I'm not sure where it was originally, but it would have been something that when he became emperor, Marcus Aurelius, he would instruct sculptors throughout the Roman Empire to place these statues of the current new Roman emperor all throughout. It was a way of making the people know who the emperor was, giving them a visual to know who their king, who their emperor is, who they are bowing down to. And every emperor, when this would happen, had the option or choice of what he would be depicted like. Now, he depicted himself on a horse. He wanted it done that way to show his equestrian skill and power as a military leader. The original would have had actually that horse's hoof that's up in the air was like stepping on a slain enemy to show his power in leadership and defeating other nations, and that he was in control of his empire. Another little thing that's different is than many other statues of Roman emperors was that he chose to have himself sculpted with a beard. And the reason he did that is he wanted himself known as a philosopher king. A beard was a sign of philosophy, a thinker. And he wanted himself depicted that way. Now, there aren't a ton of these. Many times when a new emperor would become in charge, would begin to rule, they would have the previous emperor's statues melted down, and they would recast their statues, have sculptors go to work and recast their statues how they wanted them to be. So this was like a way of, where when the president wins, we have news media everywhere, right? We have scenes on our TV. It's very easy to announce who the new president is, but this was, think about in this time period, in 161 to 180 AD, there wasn't a way to do that. Of course, they had the Roman roads, and they would send people throughout to announce it and to have so that it was known who the emperor was. But this was just like a looming statue that would be in many, many public places throughout the empire, many towns, many cities throughout the empire, so people could remember and focus and look at who is their emperor. Kind of like a constant presence of him in their town, village, city. Well, it probably didn't have them in villages, but any prominent place throughout the empire. Another example, again, our theme is politics and the social order. So you can see how Marcus Aurelius was stating his power, his position in the social order. I'm at the top of the social order, right? I'm your emperor. Here's kind of a totally different spin on thinking about politics and the social order. You have Pablo Picasso, which you've probably heard of his name before, a famous Spanish painter. He was known for his Cubist style, his very abstracted style. Remember, we learned about abstract. let's just take a second to think about that. We learned that when things are naturalistic, we can tell what they are. So you could probably look through this painting and say, well, I can tell there's some people in there. I might see a horse and a light bulb and a bull potentially. So there is a touch of naturalism in there in that we can recognize what they are. But you would have to agree, I'm sure, that these images have been so abstracted or changed so much that they are becoming very non-naturalistic. They are becoming, some cases, unidentifiable, very cartoonish, we could say. So they have been changed or abstracted. So we definitely would call his work, most all of his work, well, I shouldn't say most all of his work, because Picasso's early work, as we'll look at later this semester, was actually very realistic. He was trained as a regular painter in an art school where he learned to paint highly realistic works of art, but then his choice was to graduate to this more abstract style. So yes, categorizing him definitely as an abstract artist. So what we have here, how is this in the theme of politics and the social order? What we have here is actually, it's titled Guernica. Guernica was a Spanish city that a Spanish general allowed Hitler to have Germans test bombs on this city. It was a horrific thing to do. Now, was the Spanish general bullied to do that? Most likely. But this is an image of the bombing of this city, Guernica, during the Spanish Civil War. This shows like body parts kind of swinging throughout, people in pain and agony, and animals being injured, and so it just shows the devastation of a bomb being tested on this city. Picasso was living in Paris at the time, and he created this to show the outrage. So Picasso, a Spanish artist, was living in Paris out of harm's way, so to speak. Though really none of Europe was out of harm's way. He was at least fairly safe, and he submitted this to be hung at the Paris World's Fair of 1937. It is a big painting. It's 25 feet by 12 feet in size. So your average room size, wall size in a house or most buildings is 8 to 9 feet tall. So if you can picture 12 feet tall, or picture a 6-foot person twice as tall, 2 6-foot people standing on top of each other. That's how tall it is. By double that again, 25 feet. So it's a very large painting. And, you know, the World's Fair of 1937 was kind of an artistic celebration. And so this was really a downer for that. It was not it's obviously not a happy painting. It's painted in grays and kind of depressing colors to show the horrors of this war. Now this was prior to obviously World War II, but it's the influence of Hitler even at that time, before the actual war took place. Testing bombs on a Spanish city. So that's one artist's voice using art to represent his political outrage of what was happening. Okay, the next theme, I should say, is stories and histories. So this is number 3. We've done the sacred realm, we've done politics and the social order, and we are now doing stories and histories. I'm sure you're catching on at this point that we are just using a random sampling of artworks again to illustrate and be examples of these themes as we go through. So sometimes I show you artworks that really clash in style, time period, purpose, but they are related by their theme. And as we go through these, I want you really just to think, like, we are talking cave paintings to art produced today in 2024. We are talking the full spectrum and history range of all artworks. And I'm just selecting a couple of artworks to illustrate these themes. So what are stories and histories? How is that theme recognized in artwork? Artists sometimes use stories as subject matter to express cultural history or shared experiences. I think this one's pretty easy to understand what this theme means, but let me show you a couple of challenging works to help you understand it better. This is a photograph of an artwork that is three-dimensional. It's hanging in an art gallery. You can see the floor there. It's on a white wall. And then this artist has displayed their artwork on the wall. So we see a photograph of this kind of partially three-dimensional artwork. This is Christian Boltanski, and it's titled Altar to the Chassis High School, 1987. So what we're looking at here is basically a memory of the historical episode that we know as the Holocaust, which I'm sure you're aware is the mass murder of European Jews and other populations by the Nazis during World War II. A little bit of background. Chassis was a private Jewish high school in Vienna. Boltanski began with a photograph that he found of the graduating class of 1931. It was kind of the inspiration for this artwork, knowing that these students that were in this graduating class of 1931 lived through this time period of the Holocaust, and they were Jewish students. 18 years old in the photograph, the students would have been roughly 25 when Austria was annexed by Germany at the start of the war. Most of them probably perished in the death camps, because we know that Austria was definitely taken over by Germany, and any Jewish people would have definitely been most likely taken to the death camps. Boltanski rephotographed each face from this class picture. So you see here, you can kind of see the size frame based on the floor. These photographs, I'm guessing, are somewhere in the 12 by 14 size range. So they're large, very large photographs of an original, probably small picture. And when they're enlarged, you get pretty blurry results. So the photographs are blurred out. It's hard to see who they are. It's hard to recognize who they are, especially the top one. Like, look at his eyes. You can kind of see maybe if you knew the person who they were, but it's blurred. It's definitely not as identifiable. It's giving you sort of a fuzzy rendering of their faces. And then also you have those are lights. Those are three-dimensional spotlights hanging over the pictures, purposefully kind of overlapping the picture to distort it. You have these wires going around too. And the spotlights look very old. They look like they would be from that time period of the 1930s. So you also have in addition to the 3 large portraits, above those you have 3 other portraits. So in this particular photograph, we can't hardly see them at all because they're smaller, they're blurred, and then the spotlights are right over their faces. So it's hard to see. The effect that you could take from this is it's like someone from long ago kind of calling out to us. We try to recognize them, but we cannot quite recognize them. And so we're trying to see, but again, those lights blocking the way and then the kind of light shining on the faces, it almost creates like a halo effect, which may have been also what the artist was trying to do. It reminds us of interrogation lamps, definitely. And we wonder too, what are in those boxes? So these boxes are like little tin boxes that are attached to the wall. What's in those? Ashes, possessions, documents. They have no labels. The identities of the people are not labeled. We don't know who they are. So this is to really be just kind of like a story, an unanswered story, leaving you kind of feeling eerie and wondering, but also knowing what happened during the Holocaust. So you have the answers as well. And what does the title say? It's an altar. It's an altar, like a thing that you are commemorating. An altar is a place of worship, which is something to think about in itself, like worshiping the people, what happened, the school. It's interesting to think about that. What is the artist trying to say with that? But certainly, they are telling a story. This artist is telling a story about the Holocaust, about the lives of these people, and also commemorating or recognizing a historical event. The next slide is going to be quite different. It's a painting, so shifting gears. I kind of like to do that, and it's almost like a shocking experience when you shift gears between different works of art. But totally different appearance, yet doing the same thing as far as it's telling a story, it's talking about a piece of history. This is another Christian religious example. This is by Sasetta. And the title is St. Francis Giving His Mantle to a Poor Man and the Vision of the Heavenly City. The date on this one is 1437 to 44. Very similar time period to the one we looked at in the category of the sacred realm when we looked at Madonna enthroned. It's kind of a similar time period. And some of the similar characteristics we see in comparing those two, we can see they have halos around their head. I don't see too much, well, maybe, yeah, actually a little intention. If you look at the inside the house there, the woman in red, you can see the angel above her, and the angel is a little smaller, I think, in size, so that kind of shows that, again, the bigger the person, the more important the person. What we see here is one of the best loved saints was St. Francis of Assisi, and that's who we see here. He had lived only about 2 centuries earlier than the painting was done, a couple hundred years before. He was the son of a wealthy merchant in an Italian town of Assisi. Francis, as a young man, renounced his inheritance. He was wealthy, but he renounced his inheritance for a life of extreme poverty in the service to God. He preached to all who would listen, including birds and animals, and cared for the poor and the sick. He founded a religious community that was eventually formalized as the Franciscan Order of Monks. In the painting here by Sasetta, he illustrates 2 episodes from St. Francis's life. To the left, Francis, still a wealthy young man, gives his cloak to the poor. To the right, The artist cleverly uses the house. Do you see how it's like blocking it out like a section? So we can see inside the house, and that creates a separate space. This is called like a painting within a painting. So you have this part, and then you have this part. It's kind of like a story within a story. And here the angel appears to Francis while sleeping. I called him a girl. That's actually Francis sleeping, sorry. And grants him a dream vision of the heavenly city of God. The angel's upraised hand leads our eyes to the vision, which is portrayed at the top of the panel. Can you see the heavenly city in the sky? So 2 stories within a one, but it's telling of the life of this St. Francis of Assisi. Telling 2 stories about his life. The vision and how he did his good works and giving what he had to the poor. So, again, 2 very different examples of how art can tell stories and history. The next theme is looking outward, the here and now. What does that mean? Looking outward, the here and now. So this theme illustrates artwork dealing with the everyday, the here and now. It often uses images that are part of the artist's everyday life. And usually, the things that you're seeing, the visual concerns, are close to their personal world. Something that the artist, it's personal to the artist, or something they see every day. There are many, many artworks like this as well throughout history where artists are just drawing, creating images of what they see in their everyday world. Not always just the sacred realm or creating stories of amazing stories of the past or commemorating something special, but this is just every day. So I have 2 very different examples to show you on this as well. They're on the same slide. So at the top you're seeing a model that was taken from the tomb of an Egyptian pharaoh. And as you can see the date, how old it is, 2134 to 1991 BCE. So we're talking very old piece of art. This is taken from a tomb, and what it is a wooden sculpture that's been painted. The figures are made out of wood. And this was a common thing you would see when pharaohs died. As you may already know, Egyptian belief is that there was an afterlife, and things that they were buried with, things that they were taking down into the tombs with them, would be part of the afterlife. Things they could either have in the afterlife, or in this case, they were creating a scene that would almost like bless the pharaoh in the afterlife. This is picturing a scene of wealth and prosperity, of having servants and cattle and herds of animals. And so in this, they are counting the livestock, showing that he has a plethora of livestock doing very well. And so the hope is that he would take that wealth and prosperity into the afterlife with him. And so, though all that is kind of sacred and almost a different theme you could think about, it also fits into this theme of looking outward, the here and now. These artists were depicting moments of Egyptian life, the here and now of that pharaoh's life, where he had livestock and was counting it. It was just an everyday event. It wasn't anything fancy or exquisite, extreme. It was just an everyday event, but it did depict the wealth that this pharaoh had, and so, as I said, that will be taken with him into the afterlife. So it was a common scene of everyday life, though planning to be used for a special purpose. The lower one, zooming, fast forwarding hundreds and hundreds of years, thousands of years in fact, to 1940 in America. This artist, Edward Hopper. The title of this painting is Gas, and as you can see, it just depicts a small town gas station, which was very common of Edward Hopper's artwork. He just depicted everyday life scenes. You have an old-fashioned gas pumps from the 1940s and a quiet rural location, it looks like. You have a man out there tending the gas pumps. So he found joy in creating these images of just an everyday scene, current to 1940. Many of the artworks we're going to look at this semester too, as we go through art history and just more purposes of why artists create work. You see that very, very often, that artists create work of what they know, what they see every day in their lives. This is a very common theme for artists. So this one was looking outward, the here and now. Okay, artists looking at what's around them and depicting it in some way from everyday life. The next theme is looking inward. Looking into the artist. Who am I? Like deep. This is more very much personal, human experience. What is it like to be human? And questions that many humans ask, like, who am I? This is also a common theme that artists create works in, is that that's just something that we all wonder, like, what is the human experience, and who am I, and what can I say about myself? The first work we'll look at is by the Mexican artist Frida Kahlo. A majority of her artworks include her in them, oftentimes self-portraits in some capacity, sometimes very realistic scenes, sometimes very almost dreamlike scenes. Oftentimes they're about her and struggles she had in her life and how she felt, and her trying to express that, perhaps like some sort of almost like a therapy that she was using art for, to help her work through her own personal experiences, struggles, a way to process that. She used her artwork. Many of her paintings are what we would call kind of like distant. Like she's letting us into her thinking and her life and her feelings, but yet she also keeps us at a distance. They kind of have a cool feeling to them. She suffered a major streetcar accident that left her in pain, having to have countless surgeries and unable to have children. And so one quote she said that kind of sums it up is, she painted her own reality. They often appear dreamy and dreamlike to us, but she's just expressing her experiences and her life as a woman, an artist, Mexican. Oftentimes you notice that she has authentic Mexican clothing on, and her hair's done in that style and fashion, which is kind of interesting because she didn't actually dress that way. If you see, not always anyway, if you see pictures of her, photographs of her, which you can because she was living in the 1940s, she didn't always dress that way. She dressed like a normal current American, but she would oftentimes put this type of traditional Mexican clothing on when she was painting herself or representing herself to show her connection to her heritage. So this one, I can't remember what the purpose of the monkeys is. She oftentimes would put monkeys was a kind of a common theme in her artwork, but a lot of it would have to do with the pain that she suffered. She was in chronic pain the rest of her life due to that streetcar accident. So one example of looking inward, her personal human experience and how she expressed that through her artwork. The next one we're going to look at in this theme, looking inward, the human experience, is by Meta Warwick Fuller, and it's titled The Talking Skull, 1937. This is a bronze statue, so it's a photograph of a three-dimensional statue. And it has a lot of meaning to it, a lot of personal inward meaning. Meta was a woman, but she's painting an image of a young boy here, kind of in a vulnerable position, and we can tell by looking at his face that he's talking to the skull. It looks like his mouth is open. He's in a gesture that's really looking to the skull, almost desperately, or really pleading with the skull, perhaps. Oftentimes, part of our human experience is wishing that we could communicate with generations of the past, asking for wisdom or for advice or pieces of the puzzle that we don't know about our lives and our family history. And so this represents like a person trying to communicate with someone beyond the boundaries of our brief lifetime. Fuller was also making a statement about her African American culture and the traumatic rupture that they had with ancestral culture that slavery had produced. She was actually a pioneering African American artist, born in 1877, when there wasn't a lot of artwork necessarily produced by African American artists, at least not in the recognized world. But she's pursued artistic training both in the United States and Europe. So we're looking at this boy, looking into this skull, and we see his thoughts through this pose that he has, like this expression on his face, that he's just yearning and looking to find answers from the past. Okay, our next theme is invention and fantasy. This encompasses a wide range of artworks as well, and the two I'm going to show you are pretty different in style and really meaning too. However, the theme you can pretty clearly see has to do with invention and fantasy. So art that springs from the imagination is represented through the theme of invention and fantasy. It is the product of dreams, fantasy, and daydreaming. The first one is by Yayoi Kusama, and it's titled Love is Calling from 2013. This artist has had an interesting life, a difficult life, being raised in Japan with kind of a broken family and lots of hardships growing up. She was very determined to become an artist and become famous, and eventually made her way to America and found her way to the popular art world. She suffered as a child from hallucinations and some mental illness, and so basically she decided to create scenes of, not scenes, but feelings and emotions from her hallucinations that she would experience. One of the things that is very repeated through her artwork is infinite, things being infinite. So what you're seeing here is an installation. This is a photograph of a room in a gallery, or a museum where they have created this installation, or she has created this installation. Remember, an installation, we learned from previous chapters, means a space that has been created for a work of art. So the floor is kind of reflective, but then you also have the entire wall space is covered with mirrors. And so these forms that she then creates on the floor that are like fabric tubes that have lights inside of them and polka dots on the outside, and they make different shapes extending from the floor to the ceiling. Those are reflected in the mirrors forever. As you've probably played around with mirrors as a kid before and see how you can make things go back in space forever. She did that with the mirror reflections. So really her goal is to create the appearance of infinite repetition. And that dot, the polka dot, is her motif, or her repeated shape that she uses in her artwork. And many of her artworks have a similar look to them like this. So not only a dream, but an actual hallucination that she would have as a child, and even in, I think, in her adulthood years, she would still have these. She has become a pretty prominent artist due to the interest in her work that is very expressive, interesting, thought-provoking, but it does fit nicely with our theme of invention and fantasy. Doing something that hasn't been done before, something very outside the box, and has to do with almost like a dream-like state of mind. The second example in this theme of invention and fantasy is Henri Rousseau's The Dream. It's a good title for this theme. This was painted in 1910. Many paintings at this time this was sort of the, Impressionism, Post-Impressionism. Images were still realistic or depicting real-life events. And he resisted that formal tradition and chose to create dreamlike images. He loved jungles, though he never actually left Paris, France. He did go to like zoos and would gather information, use books, botanical gardens and things, and he painted many images like this of jungle-like scenes, an imaginary kind of dreamlike place. I don't know if you can see it in the background. There's a figure, a dark-colored figure in the back, playing a horn in the distance, and then you have some lions prowling through the grass. Many of the critics or describers of his work would call this like a exotic scene, which was not particularly typical of French art at this time. And then we have our last theme of today is, second to last theme, is the natural world. This theme deals with our relationship to nature and the artist's use of it as subject matter. Some artists simply represent nature and others use it as a vehicle to explore other ideas. So think about what that says. Some artists are just representing nature. They just go out and they paint nature. That's a very popular theme for artists. That's really kind of how a lot of artists start, is just seeing the natural world and then desiring to depict it in some way. Whether it's a scene that they see of a landscape or a person, it's just depicting the world that God created, wanting to represent that or recreate it. But some people use it as a vehicle to explore other ideas and concepts, just to play with it and manipulate it in some way. So the two examples I'm going to show you for the natural world, pause for just a second so you can copy that explanation of the natural world. First, we'll talk about the top painting, titled The Oxbow, by our American artist Thomas Cole. During the 19th century, many American painters set themselves the American landscape as a subject. That was the subject matter, was just American landscape. And one of the first of these was Thomas Cole. He did immigrate to America from England. And this is one of his most famous paintings, the Oxbow. It depicts the Great Looping Bend, which is called the Oxbow, of the Connecticut River, as seen from the heights of a nearby mountain in Massachusetts. You can see there's like a dark storm coming in on the left side. So it's just a really detailed rendering of an American landscape. And he actually is in this painting. It's a little hard to see, and in my version I can't quite see it. Oh, yes I can. If you look to the right where you can see the river, there's a little thing sticking up. Use my cursor to circle it right here. That's actually his little umbrella that he's posted there, and this is the little spot where he was working from. So he actually painted his working area into the painting. His little knapsacks there. So we get to kind of look over his shoulder into the scene that he was painting. Artists, a lot of times when they're doing paintings like these, they will go out in the nature, into the natural world as the theme's topic is, and they will sketch out and do many preliminary paintings and drawings, and then take all of that back to their studio and look at all of their references that they have created and put it all together to create the painting. One thing that's a challenge when you're painting the natural world is that, if you think about it, the light is always changing. The circumstances are always changing. It's not like you can take 2 years and sit in one spot and see the same thing for 2 years. It's going to change seasons, weather, daytime, nighttime. So that has to all be taken into account. We'll look at other artists later this semester, like Claude Monet, who actually focused on that, painted things focusing on the changing of seasons and time of day and how the sunlight changes based on that. The second example we're looking at is by Robert Smithson, titled Spiral Jetty. He did this work in 1970. We actually call this an earthwork. That's the type of artwork he did. It's where you're almost doing like a sculptural thing, using earth to create it. This is in the Great Salt Lake in Utah. He created this. He was interested in the microbacteria that tinge the water and created shades of red. Part of the artwork, part of the goal of his artwork is that it does change over time. The water in this lake rises and falls, and there are times when it's completely submerged underwater, so you can't even see it. And then as the water goes down, you can see it more and more. Interestingly, I think that the last time it has been submerged was like 1999 or 2000, where it was completely submerged underwater. The levels of the Great Salt Lake have been continually decreasing until now it's actually just like dried up ground around it. So you do see the jetty sticking out still of the ground, but there's no water. It's like completely dried up for right now, and it has been for quite some time. the Salt Lake, as the title says, has salt in it, a high content of salt. And so as the water goes up and down, the crystals of the salt form on the rocks that form the spiral jetty, which, to clarify, the artist in 1970 hauled rock, sand from the area around the Salt Lake and created this almost like a ridge, like a pile of rocks and sand that goes out into the shape of a spiral. If you look at this photograph, you can actually see people walking on it because it's raised above the water. Gives you a little bit of perspective of how big the spiral jetty is. I think it's interesting that this thing was made in 1970. So over 50 years later, it's still there. Though, like I said, no water. It's just pretty much dried up, muddy looking stuff around it, but there is like a ridge where the jetty was created. So those are two very different examples, one a painting and one a photograph of a earthwork using nature, the natural world. And now our final theme is art and art. This one I don't think is the most common. We artists and art students certainly look at old works of art, previous works of art, a lot. They study them, they learn about them, and they certainly do influence artists' work. When I took painting classes in college, the professors would always have me immediately, when they see your style and how you paint, they want you to seek out artists from the past that painted in similar ways, that have a similar style, so you can glean from them and study them and maybe get a richer understanding of how to not copy what the artist is doing, but learn from them. And so in this theme, it even is going a step further than that. It's not just looking at at a previous artist's artwork to study it and to grow as an artist. It's actually recreating it in a way that is the new artist's work, but yet clearly makes a connection to the previous artwork. So it's like it actually explores the use of art, as the definition here says, or explanation says, explores the use of art being pursued for its own sake. A discussion question would be interesting to think about and talk about is, should this be done? Should art be pursued for its own sake, and what does that mean to you? So let me show you an example and make this a little bit clearer for you. This is the top work of art is a painting by Hokusai, a very famous Japanese artist who made many series of paintings, all usually around this mountain in the background, with the title, the mountain is named Mount Fuji. And so this one was made in 1831. Many artists are influenced by Hokusai's work. In fact, if you watch that video on Vincent van Gogh, if you were able to watch that in chapter 1, you would have seen where he was influenced by Hokusai's artwork, and he used a lot of the Japanese compositional format where, like in this one, the tree is in the foreground. You see the large tree in the front, which it's much bigger, and it's kind of in the front, like in our face, and then the rest of it is around it. But this particular artist, the lower artist, Jeff Wall, was going a step further than just being influenced by the work of art. He was actually recreating this work of art. Interestingly, in a completely different place, obviously a modern time period, just using a similar composition. You see the tree, you see the landscape going back in space, you see that he has positioned people in similar locations. You can see And this one is titled A Sudden Gust of Wind, and it was made in 1993. What is missing in Jeff Wall's version of this? Mount Fuji. There is no Mount Fuji in the background. Side note about Hokusai's painting up there. It's from a series actually titled 36 Views of Mount Fuji. So there were actually 36 paintings showing 36 different views of Mount Fuji. They all have that common thread of the mountain in the distance. So yeah, Jeff Walls does not have the mountain. So he's clearly thinking about Hokusai's painting. Wall takes seriously the idea, touched on in Chapter 2, that photography has taken over from painting, the project of depicting modern life. He does not practice photography in a straightforward way, going into the world to take pictures of objects he sees or events he witnesses. So this is going to explain a little bit how he creates these photographs. Instead, he uses the technology of photography to construct an image, much as a painter organizes a painting or a film director goes about making the artificial reality of a film. He builds a set or scouts a location, he sets up the lighting or waits for the right weather, and he costumes and poses his models. Often, as here, he uses digital technology to combine many separate photographed elements into a single image. Wall displays the finished works as large format transparencies lit from behind. A sudden gust of wind is almost the size of a billboard, and it does glow. So there's like light behind it that makes it glow. So clearly, us seeing this slide is not giving the thing justice, because it's an enormous work of art, almost billboard size. So it's just an interesting connection that he made to this previous work of art, 36 Views of Mount Fuji. Okay, so that is the summary of this chapter on themes of art. We've covered the sacred realm, politics and the social order, stories and histories, looking outward, the here and now, looking inward, the human experience, invention and fantasy, the natural world. That's one topic actually that the should be moved down, the natural world, and art and art. So, again, this is still kind of in the overview section of our study of art appreciation. You will be getting a study guide for these first 3 chapters, as I call them, first 3 lectures. And hopefully from your notes, you'll be able to complete the study guide and use that to study for the first test or quiz, whatever you prefer to think of it as. The quiz test will come directly from the study guide, so you want to make sure you get all that information down and study it very closely so you're prepared for the test. And that will be what you'll do for the remainder of this class today, is work on your study guide. And your instructor will decide when is best to give you the exam, whether you do that in today's class or wait and do that next time.